What is going on? Hey, thank you so much for joining the Pirate Broadcast. And I'm Russ Johns, and I want to share with you great people, interesting people doing interesting things. And, I want to help more people help more people. And today we're going to be talking to Paul. Paul's had an interesting career, and I just really love the idea of taking a journey and coming out with a process that works for you. Some of the things we do in life are not necessarily always what we end up doing in life. Some of the goals we have may not necessarily turn out to be what we end up pursuing later on as we gain more experience. And I just really appreciate the fact that you're here. Join us in the conversation, and let's get into it. Boom. Welcome to the Pirate Broadcast, where we interview interesting people doing interesting things, where you can expand your connections, your community. Kindness is cool and smiles are free. And let's get this party started. Are you ready for the day, Paul?
I'm ready. Yeah, it's going to be a good one. How about you?
I'm here, ready, willing, and able. So I want to jump in, Paul, because you and I have a very similar kind of universe. We started out really loving and enjoying one thing, and as we went through that, and it evolved, and our lives evolved, and things and circumstances changed, we end up doing something completely different that we unexpectedly jumped into, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So you were a sports fanatic growing up. You grew up in a farm in Kansas, and kind of got your feet wet in that area, and also somehow you got into sports. So give us the backstory of your origin.
Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in a small place of Meriden, Kansas, actually, on some gravel roads outside of Meriden, Kansas, and found sports as something of a release, right? So I grew up playing baseball. My dad was way into baseball. At some point, though, we put up a basketball hoop, and I found something meditative about just being in the backyard shooting by myself. It was a place where I could kind of maybe be more who I was. And as I grew up, I found that to be consistently true. Something I'm sure you can relate to from your music background, that sense that this is where I feel most myself. And as I continued to love basketball, I found that there was something about it that I just understood better than most people. You know how that even when you're a kid, and I think we don't give kids enough credit for this, there was that feeling of like, oh, there's something here, like there's something to this that I just know or I understand better than other people's, a faculty with my body. And just kept on doing it and ended up playing college basketball at Iowa State. Then went on to be a pro. I played for 17 different teams scattered all over the world. I was your typical kind of mercenary journeyman in that I would go wherever they wanted me. And that meant minor leagues. It meant a little in the NBA for your Phoenix Suns, the Chicago Bulls, the Atlanta Hawks. Each of those stops being very brief, but then also found some success playing in Europe and Spain, Greece, and Russia. And you mentioned a transition. Along the way, I didn't really fit in a lot of the time in basketball. So while I felt comfortable on the court, I often didn't feel comfortable in the situation because it was strange and nobody had really prepared me for it. Nobody in my family had ever played college sports, so that was all new. And then, of course, nobody had been a professional basketball player, because who had? So I started writing these emails to friends and family about what it was like starting in Athens, Greece, which was where my basketball career started. And figured out pretty quickly that if I made them funny, then people would respond to them and I would feel less alone. So developed kind of a shtick. Just every week I would like pitter patter out some thoughts on what was going on. And then a few years later, I was playing for the aforementioned Phoenix Suns, and somebody from their website came over and said, "Hey, would you write a blog for us?" These were newfangled at the time. I think they thought that I would just write down some notes and they would turn it into something cohesive. and coherence. Little did they know that I had built up this kind of ability to put into words what it was like to be a pro. And that blog ended up kind of taking off, and I signed a book deal because of it. And then that launched, kind of the point of your question, this second part of my life that I never really planned on, which was something of a writing career.
You know, it's interesting because you like music, professional sports, everybody thinks that it's so glamorous because they see a slice of it. And if you took the practice and the travel and having to be somewhere different every night and do something different every night, and, you know, dealing with all the people and travel, you know, after a while, that's not necessarily a glamorous event.
Yeah.
And so the shenanigans and the funny, the humorous part of it is almost like the everyday pieces that you actually experience throughout the process. So that's a lot of material for writing, I would imagine.
It really was. When I did sign that book deal, I of course came by an editor at Random House, and when there's there's lots of behind the scenes of writing that I think is interesting too. One of them is that editors most of the time don't really edit; they just want to buy a book. They just are more in charge of like finding interesting stories. And so when he and I were talking about the book, especially after it was done, he said, you know, I got to tell you, I thought that the thing that would sell this book was the NBA part, but the NBA part turns out to be pretty boring. The interesting parts are when I'm playing for the Yakima Sun Kings, right? And I and my roommate buy a car for $50 from the pot smoking bus driver who's driving us to practice every day. Like that's the stuff that you can really dig into. And I think that's, as you mentioned, where the turn happens in that, you know, you think it's this one thing and it's actually this other thing. And I think that's what ties into a lot of what I'm doing now, which is that I've learned over my life, whether it's basketball or writing or even my degrees in engineering, it could be the, you know, pseudo farming that I did when I was a kid, it could be Boy Scouts, it could be whatever. If you can't fall in love with the process, if you can't find something about the day-to-day, it just won't work. There's not enough glamour or money or fame in the world to help you to gut through something. If you can't figure out, if you're a musician, what is it that I love about going to load in? What is it that I love about like that moment right before the show? Whatever the thing might be. That doesn't to say that you're going to love it all the time, but just finding something in there that sparks you each day or each week.
It's really fascinating to me to think about, you know, this process that we have. You know, kids grow up and, you know, depending on what their experience is and what their exposure to different activities ends up being, we really have this thing turned upside down because you say, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's like, I have no, you know, some people are fortunate enough to know exactly where they want to go and the desire they have. You know, like that feeling you had on the basketball court, you know, that there was a feeling of comfort. There was a feeling of knowing. And fortunately, you grew tall enough to fulfill those goals, right? And so, you know, sometimes there's a groove and a kind of instinctive notion that, okay, I could do this. And a lot of kids may not necessarily have the experience or the exposure to different activities, you know, whether it be an engineer or a doctor or a plumber or somebody in the trades or, you know, driving a dump truck or, you know, all of these different careers and potential opportunities they could have. They're not exposed to enough life to understand all of the possibilities. And I think that's where a lot of people take journeys. They go from one thing to a next, and they say, "Well, I don't like that. I'm going to go to something else." And it's beautiful that we don't have to lose the experience we've gained, but it's still sometimes I would really like the opportunity to figure out what is the process, what is the aspect that we can work on to learn what we love, because you said it so specifically. You got to love something about what you're doing in order to be really good at it.
Yeah, and I think we touched briefly on things like 4-H and Boy Scouts, and as I think
Yeah.
back to those organizations, right? In 4-H, I was involved in everything from the forestry project to bird watching to raising a cow, right? And so that
Yeah.
allowed me the opportunity to try out these things in a pretty low stakes environment,
Yeah.
and I could find out, like, do I love that? Does it resonate? Similarly, I think things like, even think about the merit badge sash in Boy Scouts, right? You get these different
Yeah.
merit badge for different things. And that allows you to figure out, like, do I like wood carving? Do I like canoeing? In school, when you're exposed to music, plays, all of these things, I think the breadth of opportunity allows you then to feel a lot more confident in the one thing that you do choose, because you can say, I tried a bunch of things and this is the
Yeah.
one that really resonated. And I think, I see this a lot I'm not necessarily involved in sports, but of course I'm aware of it. And there is an increasing specialization that happens to kids when they're young in sports. And I think that's true for not just sports, but even academic pursuits. I saw a friend posted the other day that her kids had gotten into some very specialty-based school in sophomore year of high school. And that to me seems really destructive, that we're not giving people the opportunity, because we're also learning we're going to live forever now, not in a literal sense, but compared to our ancestors, we have a long time to live, which means you're actually going to need to do several different things in your life. So why would you force someone to specialize so early?
Yeah. Well, I look back on my career and I've done a lot of different things. It's like, and some of those careers were inside an organization that I created for myself, and that's I don't know, I just continue to share this idea that we're living in the most amazing time in the history of humanity, because this thing that we're doing right now, Paul, this live streaming, this technology that allows us to actually connect over miles or thousands of miles, it's really amazing that what we can actually learn from each other and actually start a conversation and discover these things as we grow and evolve as individuals. And also, I think it's also the downside, or the opposite is, there's kids growing up, instead of wanting to grow up to be a police officer or a fireman or something like that, they're saying, I want to be a YouTuber.
Right. Yeah.
And it's kind of like the NBA, a few of the most talented individuals get to play, and but there's a lot of opportunity there, and there's a lot of upside, so they see it that way. So
there's a phrase that is used in several contexts, but I remember it from physics, right? The idea that there is no such thing as a free lunch, that you will always have to pay for things in a physics environment. If you use energy over here, you're going to pay for it over here. And I think that's true with technology, right? That yes, this provides us with this amazing opportunity to connect, and that's a powerful tool, but we also have to manage that tool, because it can be addicting. It can maybe lead to confusion if we don't have the normal context of a face-to-face conversation. So there's it's overused probably, but that idea of, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think we have to now learn how to keep these things in their boxes, and we have to do that with even more diligence than we did, when it was just a phone line and the ability to write letters. Maybe those were your only two choices of conversation. Those were powerful in their own right compared to 1,000 years ago, and those had to be managed as well. The issue, I think, right now is the exponential curve of change, right? And how do we manage that and still get done the things that we know we need to get done?
Yeah, it's amazing how much change is taking place. Hey, I want to give a shout out to a few people that joined us, Paul. Nina, hey Russ, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Nina's part of the Windjet crew over there. Elise, hello. Thank you so much from South Africa. Amran, hello everyone. Jenny Gold is here. She's up from Colorado. She's in your neck of the wood, Paul. So
Hi,
Gabe Lil, Thank you so much. Hey, Gabe, what's going on? Catch up with me at some point in time. Kenneth Dunner Jr., savor the flavor of the awesomeness in you, sir, for sharing your delectable thoughts with us today and every day. I know who I am. Thank you so much. Take care. And I just really, Paul, I want to shift gears and talk about the book you just launched and some of the things that you have going on in your business that are, because you're helping a lot of other people, and some of these things that are, people need to be aware of the opportunities they have to actually maybe unlock their process, unlock what's going on that's right in their life, and maybe they need to adjust along their journey and what that looks like, and how you actually support them. So
Of
talk
course.
talk about that and what you got going on today.
I think a lot of what I do now is actually tied back to growing up in a small place and feeling like other people had the information and they didn't necessarily want us to get it, right? So I
Mm,
saw that a lot in all of these aspects of childhood, whether that was sports or the aforementioned school, 4-H, Boy Scouts, etc. And when you got on the inside, a lot of times you realize like, oh, it's actually not that complicated. It's just that maybe they were a little insecure about divulging what it was really like on the inside. And so
mm,
a lot of what I do when I talk about process, building systems, habits, rituals, and routines is ways to come up with manageable routines so that you can accomplish big goals. I kind of put this together when I was working on a writing career and had some misconceptions about what writing really was. I thought it was the stereotype of, every 2 weekends you go off to a cabin in the woods and write for 13 hours or something. It turns out that it's exactly like sports, and it's exactly like music. You have to do a little bit every day, but you have to
yeah,
do it every day, right? And when I say every day, that could mean you take a couple of days off a week.
yeah,
But if you can figure out how to build that into your day, so I still write for 40 minutes 6 days a week, and it's amazing how much material I churn out. So the revelation, though, was figuring out like, oh, it's not just sports, it's not just writing, it's not just creating art. It's basically everything, that everything comes back to building a system that you can count on. And this is what we started talking about, it's not enough to have that system. You have to love it in some way. Like we've talked about,
mm,
there's just not enough reward in the world to justify you gutting your way through something. So that's what
yeah,
I talk a lot about in the book is, and that's why the title, The Process is the Product, turning your process into your product, making sure that you have something you can count on every day, something you can control, right? We talked before the show about your music making, right? Music
yeah,
is such a great example of this because it's so subjective. In sports, if my team wins enough times, you kind of start to make the link like that Paul Shirley guy is pretty good. Music could be subjective not only on personal taste, but also on what's going on in the zeitgeist at the moment. You
yeah,
could make something that would be considered genius if you made it 10 years from now or 10 years ago. But right now, people just are not into it. So you have to find satisfaction in making that music for yourself and maybe
yeah,
sharing it with 5 people or 10 people. But you can't count on becoming the next Metallica. That is insane, right? It just wouldn't work. And I think because you mentioned technology, we're all faced with people who seem highly successful, and we see them in the palms of our hands. And so it actually makes it, I think, harder on people because it seems, as you said, that it's glamorous, that we're catching all of those slivers all at once, and we forget that those people also have processes that they can count on. That's what we do at the business. I run a workspace here in Denver with structured sessions to help people set a goal at the beginning and talk about how it went at the end. And then we have an online version, the process online. We also do some business to business work, doing modules for people or for companies talking about these things of helping them build habits, but also work-life balance and those sorts of things. And this all comes back to, again, this idea of demystifying accomplishment or achievement for people. in the same way that I would have liked someone to demystify some things when I was a kid growing up in Meriden, Kansas.
Yeah, that you're so spot on, because having a process, and I love the analogy, the process is the product, and what that actually means, because once you build a process and you enjoy this, it's almost like flow. Get in the flow of things, and all of a sudden time disappears. You
Mm-hmm.
just get in you get in that groove, from a musical perspective. You get in the groove, and all of a sudden that's the only thing you're looking at. That's the only thing you're enjoying. That's what you're doing. That's it. And I know that writing
Totally.
could be that way. I know any kind of creative process is that way. And also, I've done woodworking, building, and there's a lot of things that you can actually apply that same principle to. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's just
you're
a
speaking my
fascinating.
language.
Yeah.
You may see me smiling because this is what I'm so into, is creating opportunities for flow states, right? So people are aware of what you just said, being in the zone, and that stuff is like really hardwired into us. We get addicted to it in a very positive way through a process called myelination, which is when you start to coat the neural pathways in myelin, and you get better and better at it as you coat them in more and more myelin, and then you get more and more addicted. That's why destructive habits are also hard to break. But when you can figure out how to build these positive habits, after a certain amount of time, it becomes so addicting and so fulfilling, because we're hardwired to love this feeling of being in a flow state. What I think is interesting too is that, we do associate it with music and sports and writing and creative aspects of our lives, but we forget that you and I could be in a flow state in a great conversation, right? We've probably dipped in and out of that in this conversation. You could be in a flow state while sending a really effective email. I think we have to also show people that it's not just confined to some magical creative land, that A, we're all creative, and that B, a lot of what we do in our lives can be creative. I mean, we have a graphic designer at the process, but I have had to learn some graphic design along the way. Yesterday, I was working on some silly sign in Adobe Illustrator, and in a lot of ways, I love being able to create something that I'm going to now print out and post, and it's not worth sending to the graphic designer, but I will get into a flow state even in that. What we also, though, have to remind people of is that stuff is taxing, right? That it's tiring to be in flow states. So we have to come up with these cues and rewards, knowing that we can only do it for a certain amount of time. I, for example, will only allow myself 3 or 4 tasks that are going to involve, quote, deep work every day, because I know that's all I can really handle. I think we have also kind of done people a disservice thinking that they need to work for a zillion hours every day, and that's just not possible.
And it creates resistance to flow, because you're so exhausted, you're mentally exhausted, and you can't. The process is broken when you're exhausted, and I just don't. I think it's counterproductive, because you can really go deep and get very productive in a very short period of time on a few subjects every single day, and then take the break, take the rest, take the mental, uh, time out, if you will, and enjoy some of the circumstance and surroundings that you have in your life. So, hey, I want to say shout out Nick. Nick, good morning, pirates. He's a pirate here. Kenneth says my LinkedIn account is restricted at the moment. I don't know why. What did you do, Kenneth? Are you shenanigans again? Charlene, good morning. How are you doing, my friend? Joseph Kinsley's here, and the amazing entrepreneur. I know, Paul, that there are so many things that we could talk about. I think I could enjoy sitting down and talking to you for a long time, and enjoying this idea, because I believe that there is processes there. Not necessarily, they're not all lifestyle process. There's technology processes. There's business processes. There's all kinds of processes we can think about. And once it's almost like poetry. Once you see something all come together that just works and just is smooth and relaxed, it just is in alignment. It just makes life so much easier. And if anything you can do in your life, that's what it is. That's where the magic happens. And so where do people find you, and how can you help them get to that point? Because I know that you're helping a lot of people out there. So kind of talk about how you
Yeah.
help people and who you help.
So I think our biggest goal is to help people who are maybe on their own. So that's creatives, it's
Mm.
freelancers, it's contractors, it's people who are these like digital nomads, right? Who maybe have been sold on the dream of like, hey, yeah, go do it by yourself. And then they realize like, oh, it's pretty hard to do it on your own. We talk a lot about changing behavior through behavior. So that means that
Mhm.
that's why at our physical space and online, all of our sessions are bounded. So they start on the hour, they finish after an hour. There's some element, as I mentioned, of setting a goal beforehand. There's some element
Mhm.
of hopefully getting into a state of deep work for 45 minutes or an hour and a half, depending on the length of the session. And then there's some element of chatting or commiserating about how it went. I have also found that people are in need of accountability and community, right? We all want to find our tribe. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people out there who are interested in these things around balancing a work life and a creative life. They want to develop personally, they want to get better, but they maybe haven't been given tools by the job they have, by the boss they have. So that could be people who are struggling with working from home. It could be, and this is of course pre-COVID, that there are so many people out there fighting the good fight by themselves, right? They maybe are an independent contractor with an ad agency. And so they're left with, well, how do I actually set up my day? How do I go through this? We liken
Yeah.
it a lot to going to, for the physical space, going to a yoga studio, right? It's a lot easier to do yoga when you do it with other people. And we find that to be true about deep work. There's that positive peer pressure of knowing like, you know what, I put on that giant chalkboard that I'm going to send 6 emails. So therefore I am not going to go on Facebook. I'm going to send these 6 emails. And then when the buzzer sounds, I will go back to the chalkboard with Paul and we'll talk about what a success it was, or if it was a failure, what a failure it was, and how I might do a little bit better the next time.
I'm a huge fan of masterminds, and a lot of times that's what exactly takes place in the mastermind. It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
accountability 101. It's like, did you do what you
Yeah.
say you're going to do? And did you get focused enough to get it accomplished? And where are you stuck? How are you stuck?
Mm-hmm.
What's going
Mm-hmm.
on? And how can we help? And it's
Yeah.
really,
No, I
go ahead.
think that there's just so much comfort in knowing that there are other people out there who are similarly befuddled by what they're
Yeah.
going through, right? And so knowing that like you can cultivate an environment where people are unafraid to say, yeah, I'm not sure what I'm doing either, and that is the best thing you can say a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not alone. We're not alone,
Mm-hmm.
Paul.
Mm-hmm. We are not.
We all got to figure it out. Well, I truly appreciate the fact that you dropped by to share a few words of wisdom with the pirate crew here. And I look forward, and thanks for becoming a pirate too, by the way. So,
Thank you
as
for
we get through this,
allowing me in.
we get through this whole process, and I really truly believe if I can help more people, and I do that through introductions with people like yourself, people doing great work, people doing creative work, and just this process that we're involved in right now, and getting through some of the challenges that we're seeing around the world. I think it's either going to develop our character, or it's going to share some of the things that we need to work on in our life. So I really do appreciate you joining us today, and being present and sharing these things. So if anybody wants to reach out to Paul, createyourprocess.com. If you're in Denver, you could probably stop by and check out your facility. What's the name of your facility?
It's called The Process.
The
and
Process.
You can see on that website, we have a couple of different options. If people are most interested in the physical space or the online version, they'll find it there.
I'll have to talk to you about this idea I have with setting up studios in co-working spaces so I can actually generate live stream content around the world for business owners that want to highlight some activities. So
cool.
But that's another adventure. So.
Yeah, sounds like you have plenty to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Pirates. Thank you so much for joining in. If you joined this show or you enjoyed anything about this show, you want to share it, like, comment, all the social shenanigans that takes place that makes it exciting and happy. Also, join us, Tuesdays, Thursday morning, 7 a.m. Arizona time, Wednesday night at 5. Sharing some interesting stories and interesting people just like Paul. And Paul, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And we do this because kindness is cool and smiles are free. And I want you to enjoy your day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Russ.
You bet. Thank you for joining the Pirate Broadcast. If you found this content valuable, please like, comment, and share it across your social media channels. I would love the opportunity to help others grow in their business. The Pirate Syndicate is a platform where you show up, we produce the show. It's that easy. If you want to be seen, be heard, and be talked about, join the Pirate